Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us for this didactic session. What we'd like to talk about today for the next hour is research career mentoring. And what we would like to do is share some thoughts about how mentoring may change for those who are interested in a research career over the academic life cycle. And we are your hosts. My name is Clay Merchant, and I would like to talk to you first about medical students, and then afterwards, Dr. Lynn Richardson from Mount Sinai would talk to you about mentoring for residents, and then Dr. Michael Donnino about fellows from BI Deaconess, and Dr. Manish Shah from University of Wisconsin about junior faculty. How this will work is that I'll first provide a few overarching themes about mentoring over the academic life cycle. And what we mean by academic life cycle is what you see there: medical students to residents, fellows, and junior faculty. So after a few general thoughts about that give an overarching theme of the progression over the stages and how mentoring may change, then I'll spend a few minutes talking about specifically mentoring for medical students. And then we'll take about 1 or 2 minutes for 1 or 2 clarifying questions, and then go on to the next speaker and so on. So at the end, we'll have time for about 10 minutes of discussion, because I think this session is about 50 minutes in length. So we want to get you on to the next one in time. So for clarifying questions or something burning you've got to ask or say, a clarifying question could be saying, you know, Dr. Richardson, did you say dragon glass or dragons with gas? Can I understand what you said? Something like that. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit about what we think are maybe the overarching themes for mentoring over time in the academic life cycle, going from medical student, resident fellows to junior faculty. I think the big themes is it's the transition from possibilities to a career in research. And that might be thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to be a researcher, or what does it entail, what do I need to do to be a researcher, is this something for me, to launching a career, or right at the verge of launching an independent career in research. Also expect over the academic life cycle that the expected milestones, what's to be accomplished at each stage, probably differs. And they are probably in an iterative fashion where you expect the milestones to build upon each other. So to get to the next stage, you have to accomplish certain things to help you get to the next stage. It's also a theme of progressive responsibilities, that at the beginning you may be doing a lot but not responsible for a whole much, where at the end you may be more of a supervisor and doing less but responsible for a whole lot more, which goes along with increasing independence over time, which is what we'd like to instill. As the medical student may lessen independence over the project, but the junior faculty expected to have quite a bit of independence. And the needs are different over the stages. Is that what a medical student might need might differ than what a resident or fellow or junior faculty might need. The nature of the relationship between mentees and mentors will also likely change from where it's more of I'm your teacher, your professor, to I'm now your colleague and collaborator, and maybe your mentor emeritus, for example. So let's talk a little bit about mentoring of medical students for potential career in research. First things I think are questions that the mentee and the mentor need to consider before engaging in a relationship and deciding whether to be mentored or to mentor someone. For medical students is, what am I looking for? And for them, this could be a really challenging question. Why am I searching for a research mentor? Do I have a good reason for this? Do I need a research mentor? And if you're doing a research project, I would say yes. But who should that be? And what do I want to accomplish from not only the research project itself, but with working with this mentor? Who should I ask? Is it the person I know, someone I don't know? Should I be reaching out beyond my circle of knowledge? Who should advise me for this? And why am I asking this particular person? Is it just because they're convenient, there's someone I saw, I worked with them on rounds, maybe they said something about research or I read about them, or is it something better that may actually lead to a productive relationship that they may not know? For mentors, the big question is why are you mentoring at all? And is this the right stage in your career to be doing this? Now, that could change from mentoring that you do as a part of your practice as an academician versus actually spending time devoting with a mentee to develop a relationship to carry them forward in their career. Are you in the right stage of your career to do that? Are you doing it for the right reason? In other words, are you doing it for career advancement, or are you doing it to help your mentee? And can you do it? Do you have the skills to do this? Do you have the interest? Do you have the time to devote for this project and this person? So why do medical students look for mentors? And this is where I think also it's the moment of truth, is coming to terms with yourself and saying, what am I actually looking for? And medical students may not have this completely solidified in their minds, but the thought is that for most medical students, the relationship with the mentor is going to be built around a particular project. And that may be a project that they present or come to you for questions for. And part of it is deciding, well, what exactly do you need to do? What does this project have to accomplish? Is this a summer research project where you say, I have this summer off, I don't know what else to do, maybe I'll earn some money, maybe I'll learn a little bit more research. Is it just a possibilities, or is it something that's required? Is it something that I can spend 4 years doing, 3 years, 2 years, or a limited time? Do I have a product that I have to put forward after I complete it? Am I thinking, I'm going to go into a competitive residency, I need to do a research project where the interest is not so much about the research itself, but it's about building the resume? Or is it research career curious, saying that for those who have gone into research before you, say, come to the question of maybe I think this is something that's right for me, something beyond clinical practice that I would like to do in addition to clinical practice or instead of. And I think that part of it is having the mentee realize why they actually are coming to you and having that true, honest conversation of discerning what the needs are. And I really do think that this stage for medical students, it's all about the project, finding the right project for that mentee, that particular mentee, for the right purpose at the right time. Meaning, what really will work for that person may be different for a different medical student, because the purpose of coming to you and having a research project in mind could be vastly different from other medical students. And the timing may not be right for them or for you as a mentor. Is it, as we mentioned before, residency seeking? Are they planning on building a career? Do they have a time-limited period, a summer research project, or is it more time flexible? For example, like a capstone project that they may do, where they have a bit more flexible. And then finding that project together and saying, this is a project that you can do in X number of weeks, but it will lead to some limited products thereafter, but it will accomplish that need for you because this is the time you have to do it. Or is it a broader thing that said, here's a project that you can pick up and drop over the next 2 years that will lead to perhaps a larger project, but fills your needs for a bigger purpose. And I think sort of understanding for then the purpose and the skill sets and motivation is important. What are the needs at this career stage? I would say in terms of mentoring, a directive approach, very heavy-handed, of sitting down together, picking the project, but then understanding that this person may need a lot of direction in helping decide the project, setting clear goals for that project and the relationship, clear timelines in an iterative fashion to where the project is completed. So it may be not, let's come back and talk in a couple of weeks and see where you are, maybe next month I'll check in with you, but saying, here, in 2 weeks, have this read, IRB, application by this period, next the training should be done like this, et cetera, to where you have outlined over the period of time that's available to them every milestone that needs to be completed. An emphasis on the basics, not make assumptions. Some of the medical students may come to you, maybe starting at the very beginning. What is an IRB? How do I look up things on PubMed? How do I put together a proposal? What should I be applying for grants? What should that be? Regular fixed meeting schedules, provision of examples. I think this probably is the best approach, particularly at the medical student stage, is saying, here's what I've done before. Here's a grant application, here's an IRB application, here's an article I've written. Copy this. Use this format. And then we can discuss together what works best. The things that I think should be accomplished at this career stage is, do they understand what they're doing? Do they understand what the true purpose of this project is? Why, what steps we're taking, and for what reason? Not just sort of muddling through like we mostly do when we're learning about medicine. We have sort of a rough idea what cirrhosis is about and what the steps are. But I think this should be a bit more gelled because it should be more focused, and so that they can explain to their friends and themselves why they're doing what they're doing, what it means. Other basic steps, get the human subjects training, get understanding of the background about that knowledge of the topic, learning how to find references appropriately, initial draft of the abstract, manuscript, may not be perfect, but at least that they've started it. Presentation practice and delivery, and if possible, small grant. I think these are the accomplishable goals and that the basic expectations, the milestones for medical students. Some pearls and pitfalls, patience, clarity, regularity, availability, and time. These all sound like nice things, but they are true. Right size project. I think that's probably the most important. The big picture focus with the medical students is, yes, we'll focus on the project, but also what are you planning on doing from here afterwards? And a tangible product. Not just a cog in the wheel, not just something that they can talk about, unless that's really what they only wanted to do, but something that they can hand and put on their, to show someone that they've done. An abstract, a poster, a presentation, but better a manuscript to carry forward. I think some of the pitfalls are the too big of a project, something that's not accomplishable, something that doesn't have clear bounds or endpoints to it. It's a poor fit. It's not something they were really interested in. The motivation wasn't there. The guidance wasn't there. Cog in the wheel research, just feel like a number. You're part of the factory, but not really building. Or the mentor over-reliance on the project. I think this is also a problem, mostly for mentors, is that if your career is based on the success of this medical student's project, that's not a good fit, because then you will be disappointed. Because if they can't deliver or can't deliver in the way you'd like or in the time frame, then that's your problem. It really should be chosen at the beginning, something that works for you at that time period. So, any clarifying questions or comments? Not? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Clay. It's a little bit ironic, right, that you're asking me to talk about mentoring residents. I believe when I first met you, it's when you were my resident many, many years ago.
Two or three.
Yeah, decades maybe. Anyway, good afternoon. So I imagine each of us is going to have a slightly different approach to this topic, and I think that's fine. That's kind of the way emergency medicine works. We do things differently. So I think if you're a resident who's interested in research, whoops, oh, it is a very sensitive cursor up here. That the most important thing that you should be doing is to find the best mentor that you can find. And it's really important that if you're interested in research, that the mentor you find is a researcher. It has to be an experienced, preferably funded investigator, and if at all possible, someone who has a solid track record as a mentor. Because if you move forward in your career of research, that relationship with the mentor is going to be very important to you, and that mentor's recommendation is really going to help you get to the next stage. If you are at the end of residency applying for a research fellowship, which is what you should be doing if you are interested in a research career, you're going to want to have a letter from someone who your fellowship director will recognize as a researcher. There are some very accomplished, very big names in emergency medicine, very well-respected clinical experts, people who edit journals, but who are not researchers. And choosing such a person as your mentor, though they may be charismatic and knowledgeable about what they do, will not serve you well. As a fellowship director, it's a little bit like when the residency director gets a letter from the director of the psych rotation for the medical students saying how they were such a star in, on the psychiatric ward. That's not going to help you get an emergency medicine residency. And so a letter from someone who doesn't do research is not going to help you get into a research fellowship, however big a name they are. And I see these kind of mistakes all the time in terms of the letters that get sent to me by fellowship applicants, because you need someone who actually understands what it takes to do research, who's actually conducted clinical trials or basic science or interventional trials, who knows what it takes to become a good researcher, so that that'll carry weight. So find the best mentor you can. You're going to have to go find them. They're not going to come looking for you. And make sure that you find somebody who is really committed to your success. And that means that they are willing to commit resources to helping you get a good research experience as a resident, because that's what mentors do. Now, it's interesting, Clay, you said it's important that like the medical student has like a project that's a good fit, something they're interested in. And I think that's true because they're kind of young and naive. But I would say to the residents, the relationship is more important than the project. And so if the best mentor that you can identify in the faculty in your department is doing trauma research, but you really want to do sepsis, do the trauma project with the great mentor instead of the sepsis project with the mediocre mentor or the inexperienced junior faculty member who was very charismatic on shift, and that's how they got you to help them with the project. If you're serious about research, find the very best mentor that you can. And then your main priority during residency is going to be to cultivate your relationship with that primary mentor. It's fine to develop relationships with other mentors and with other investigators at varying levels. Peers and near peers can be fine. It's a time when you can explore different content areas and different lines of inquiry. Many residents are very undifferentiated in what their research interest is, what their focus is going to be. That's fine. Or being typical emergency physicians, they're interested in several different things. This is a time when you can do different things, do small projects with different people, and try some of that stuff out. But focus on projects that will actually teach you to do useful things. Okay? You should be acquiring methodologic skills, doing a real literature review, learning to actually consent and recruit patients in the emergency department. Maybe it's statistical skills. Maybe you'll learn how to do a qualitative interview. Learn how to do things that are the pieces of which research is made. Go to a works in progress session if there's a research division in your department, so you can hear about how experienced researchers go from an idea to a project to data to a published completed project. Attend conferences. Obviously, I'm preaching to the choir here because you're already at SAEM. Go to the abstract sessions. Talk to the people who are doing them. Find out what kind of projects people are doing in the areas you're interested in. And read the literature. You are seeking to become an expert in some area which will be the focus of your research. You should be reading about it even now at the resident level. So the major career milestones for the residents are skill and knowledge acquisition. What I look for as a fellowship director is, did the resident complete a single original project, soup to nuts, where it was their research question? It can be somebody else's data. Primary data collection is very inefficient when you're a resident. But it was your research question and you did the study design and you actually saw the whole project through. You can collaborate on additional projects, and that, again, that really shows me that you are curious and engaged. I absolutely agree. You need a tangible product to present at a regional and national meeting. If you can submit a small grant, that's always very impressive because now you've also learned something useful, the grant application process. Your goal as a resident interested in research is going to be, at the end of it, to choose a research fellowship. And you should look for some of the same kinds of things that I talked about in choosing a mentor. You want mentors who are experienced and funded at the place that you are going to. You want to see that there are colleagues at various levels, both fellows and junior investigators, who will be your colleagues. You want to know what is the track record of graduates for the program. Have any of them actually developed careers in research? If you're going to invest in a research fellowship and you don't already have a PhD, you want a fellowship that is going to give you a research degree, a master's in clinical research or the equivalent. It should offer you at least 60% protected time so that you're actually going to be able to do the things you need to do during fellowship. If you think you want a research career, but you're not sure you want to do a research fellowship, I would say you're kidding yourself. It's very unlikely that you will get a faculty position that offers you enough protected time and enough support to build a research career. So you're going to have to make a little bit more of an investment in yourself. Okay, I think this is, oh my gosh, wow. Whose laptop is this?
No, don't blame the laptop.
Okay.
That's where you are.
I think so. So, as a mentor who's mentoring residents, I think you still need a fairly directive approach, but a slightly lighter touch than with the medical students because they are residents now and they actually have less time and more responsibilities. I think you have to be flexible and adjust your demands and expectations to the vagaries of the residents' various rotations. When they disappear into their trauma rotation, you're not going to see them for a month. You need to accept that. You don't want to scare them off. If they're a resident, they're interested in research, you want to nurture them. You want to keep them on the path. And so you want to work around their often very challenging clinical schedules and help them succeed. And you want to provide opportunities for them to learn research skills. One of the things that I often do with residents, which they actually seem to get a lot out of it, and it was not obvious to me that it would be a good investment of their time, but it seems to be, is to let them observe an experienced team of researchers in our weekly research meeting, or if you have monthly group meetings. They can float in and out of that when the rotation allows. Let them see how the sausage is made. Let them understand that doing research means you're going to be part of an enterprise much bigger than a retrospective chart review that you're doing as your senior resident project. And I think that often really helps them believe that there's a future in this. And I think the most important thing, and I think this is true of mentors at any level, is that you have to give advice that prioritizes the needs of the resident over your own. If you have a resident who's very bright and very talented, but your research fellowship is not the best thing for their development, you have to encourage them to go. You don't try to keep them because you want them. You have to encourage them to go, and this is really what being a mentor is about. Trust me, it will come back to you. I have done this more than once, sent off residents that I loved working with to fellowships that were not mine. And I've recruited several of them back as faculty, with them being extremely grateful that I actually gave them advice that was good for them and not for me. And even those who never come back, such as Clay, who never came back, I think that they go out and they do good in the world and they make you proud, like any other kind of educator. So it has to be about them when you are giving them advice on their next step. And here's my commercial. If there are any residents in the room, I run an NIH-funded research fellowship. I would like to see your applications if you're looking for a research fellowship. Feel free to come talk to me.
Any clarifying questions? No, please.
I was wondering your thoughts on a potential team approach where you have a resident, a junior faculty, and maybe then a senior faculty.
all of my work is done in teams. Research is a team sport. It is not an individual undertaking. And it's easy to add a resident to an existing team. But again, I'm going to help you carve out a project that will be an abstract that you can present at a meeting out of what's often a much larger research study that often goes on over years. So yes, I think you need to learn to work in teams. We can talk more about that after.
Yes, thank you.
Great. And Mike Donnino, I'm going to talk about research fellowship. So I think the first important question is to ask, what do you want to be as you're entering a fellowship? Are you looking to be an independent investigator? Or are you a clinical innovator or education interests with a research component on the side? I only have 7 minutes to talk here, so I'm actually going to focus on the independent investigator. But the other pathway is completely valid as well. But I just had to choose what I was going to kind of speak about in this short period of time. I'm going to kind of speak about the pathway of the independent investigator. As I begin, I'm just kind of curious who all of you are. Is anybody out here currently a research fellow or in a research fellowship? Okay, we have one person. And anybody as a mentor in a research fellowship? Okay, and then looking to get into a research fellowship, potentially. Okay. Well, I will be speaking then about the concept of research fellowship. Maybe for all those hands that didn't go up, maybe I'll convince you it might be a good idea. But if you are interested in being an independent investigator, what I define as an independent investigator is as a career, you want to be grant supported, typically NIH grant supported, be able to be conducting your own independent, if you will, research. And that term is announced because I completely agree with Dr. Richardson that research is a team sport. But the concept that they throw about as an independent researcher is that you are going to evolve into being self-supported with your grants and whatnot. In a fellowship, that's a great time and opportunity to develop toward being an independent researcher. And oftentimes I see these are the three things that are competing with a fellowship, is doing research, an actual project. The second thing is research didactics. A number of folks will come into a fellowship wanting to obtain an MPH or other degree. And then there's clinical work, often in emergency medicine. And I have a fellowship, I should say, I have about 4 or 5 fellows a year. I span emergency medicine and critical care. So there are different models. My critical care side fellows actually come in without having to support themselves in a fellowship. And the emergency medicine side will generate some revenue through the clinical means. And then, of course, there's training grants and stuff out there in other places as well. But oftentimes folks are doing some degree of clinical work. I will say that, again, there's probably different opinions on this, but in my opinion, if you're only doing a year, for example, of a fellowship, and I think that's actually probably too short, but in a year of fellowship, I don't think you can actually do all 3 of these. And I've seen time and time again people try to cram in an MPH, do some clinical work, and do a research project, and what that seems to lead to is, at first, I don't think you're effective in any one particular area, and often it leads to, I've seen people burn out. They do this research year, try to cram in their MPH and do all these other things, and they actually decide this isn't a path for them. And I think the reason is because you may be trying to do too much in this essentially growth period of time. Now, if you have a 3-year period of time, then maybe you can do the 3 balancing act, or a 2-year period of time still gets a little bit iffy. But my point is that I think during the fellowship year, it's important to decide what's the most important things, what are the elements that you think are important to you. Developing a research project and a pathway. If you have to support yourself with some clinical work, what is the total amount of clinical work? And if you are going to obtain an MPH, that's where I think and I don't think you need to necessarily, but if your mentor and if you've determined that that's the best for you, I think you have to have a longer fellowship and spread it out, and so you have the adequate time to do what you need to do during your fellowship. If I'm looking to build someone as an independent investigator, as previously was stated for residents, I think the end point, and I completely agree with Dr. Richardson said, is that you want to be able to maybe have a project where you get to present at a national conference. When I have a fellow come in, I kind of shift that goalpost a little bit. Instead of saying, okay, great, you said in the first day, let's figure out what project that we're going to get so you can present at SAEM, I start thinking, my thought process is, what is your grant? Because I think that's probably the most, to get to a training grant. And what are my projects that you're going to, what is the project and pathway that you're going to be working on toward getting to this training grant? So I wouldn't choose something that might, what I would say would be, I don't want to call it a dead end meaning that, yeah, this could lead to a paper, but it doesn't have any legs to go beyond that. I don't like those kind of projects for fellows. I like to be thinking what can lead to your grant. And once I decide where, and once the fellow and the mentor decide which is the potential and the pathway toward a training grant, start then doing some projects to build up a storyline for that particular grant. There is some controversy in this because I know that some people will encourage stay very, very focused, stay exactly where your project line is, and don't kind of get involved with anything else that can distract you. I differ in that in a little bit, and particularly when you're first coming out. Maybe you only have one publication, maybe you have no publications. In order to get a training grant, you have to have some chips on the board. So while someone's working on their main project line, I also have them, helping out on other particular projects from the fellows. So again, I think I totally agree that research is a team sport. So while you may be working on your line and having some of the other fellows help you, and you're the first author, they're co-authors, you do the same thing on their end. They're working on a project line, they have a first author, and now you're a co-author on their paper. So then 2 years later, you have 1 or 2 first author papers, but you have 3 or 4 co-author papers, and now all of a sudden you have a biosketch that's looking like you're going to get a training grant from the NIH. So I like to kind of build your publication story, but also be working on that ancillary project or whatnot. I think, whoops, seeking out the optimal training grant. So I tend to be looking, mostly at the NIH training grants are really great grants. There's plenty of other training grants out there, and I actually diversify. I like to put grants in multiple areas, put one into EMF, one into NIH and whatnot. And I think with any grant, the first step that I do is find successful grants. So if you're a mentor for a while, you've successfully mentored a number of folks on K Awards or whatever grant, EMF, that's the starting point. That goes to. So I've successfully mentored about 4 or 5 people to K Awards, and we have a repository where the first thing people come in is like, okay, here's our 4 or 5 successful grants. But then, and perhaps even more importantly, here's our 4 or 5 unsuccessful grants. This is where we had to revise or go a different pathway. So the applicant, so as a fellow, you get exposed to all the success and failure, and you can now kind of put your own pathway together. This is only, in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of cut this a little short because there's only 7 minutes to kind of speak. But I will say that it's important to kind of take that experience from the pre and training grant as you begin to put your pathway together. And once you've kind of developed that formula, like for instance, again, we've had 4 successful K Awards. We have what I would say is a formula. So we take that formula, plug the fellow into the formula. The fellow then has a pathway, their project line. They have some co-projects on the side, and voila, training grant. I'm kind of just cutting out of time here, so I'll just end by saying I completely agree again with what Dr. Richardson said about the mentor-mentee relationship. And for all the mentors out there, if you haven't found out already, is that sometimes the goals of the mentor and the mentee don't align. And I found that. It's not something that occurred to me when I first started mentoring folks, but then I recognize it happens. And I think the key is a good a mentor-mentee relationship, I think it lines up about 90% of the time, but 10% of the time it doesn't. And I think what makes a great mentor as compared to a good mentor is someone who recognizes this 10% does not line up. But I am going to sponsor and support my mentee and give them advice which might be contrary, it might actually be detrimental to you. But that's okay because you have to recognize that's what it separates the good from the great in terms of mentors. And I think it's important when you look for a mentor that you look not only at all of the things that Dr. Richardson said, I agree 100%, but one last litmus test is, are they a good person? And I don't care how long their CV is. I don't care how many R1s they have. If they're not a good person with integrity and whatnot, then I'd be concerned about that relationship. And in closing, the one mentor-mentee story I had is that someone had the perfect mentor who had all of these R01s, was the person in this particular area, but he was known to be difficult to work with. Didn't matter, that fellow went with him and got a perfect score on the K grant, and 2 years later, I didn't even know you could do this, they dropped their K award. The point is that you want to have the right person, but I also think you need to have a good person. And with that, I will close, my timeline is down, and turn over to junior faculty.
Do you have any clarifying questions for Dr. Donnino? Okay, great, thank you.
All right, as the token non-Northeasterner here. I'm going to talk a little bit about junior faculty. The key topics have really been hit. A lot of the fundamentals have been hit, and so I'm actually going to use my 7 minutes to drill on just kind of some tips and tricks, things that I think work fairly well, both for the mentee and the mentors. I have to agree with Lynn. This is an incredibly sensitive.
Thank you, Manish. Clay was trying to make me feel bad, but
I
you
saw
see.
that. Scared to go too fast. So we've been talking about mentors. The thing I would argue for a junior faculty, if you're coming to positions, you want to find that mentoring team that works. No single person is going to be that only mentor for you. And so you want to map out between content, between methods, between career type, who can give you the mix of all of that you need. Depending on what your topic is, they may be within EM or they may come from outside. I've had mentors in geriatrics and psychiatry, in methods. It's okay, and you want to map those together. Sometimes, and we find this a lot within EM, that they're actually peer mentors or they're big SIB mentors. Maybe they're a couple of years ahead of you in the process. That's perfectly fine. The key thing, and I think every one of us has said this, you want people that are in this pathway. If you're going towards independence, you want people that have gotten that K award, that have gotten that RO1, that know what it's like to walk that walk and what you're going to run into, because they have the expertise that you need. The other thing I would argue is, as you're thinking about this, you want to be competency driven, right? So we have the milestones on the residency side now. NIH has developed the very similar things on the research side. There's a bunch of models in literature. Just Google it. You're going to find one. I'll show you one on the next slide that we use, particularly within our KL2 program that I run. But basically, you want to have these competencies, and you want to see what's your current level of proficiency at these various things, and where do you want to go? If you are not doing community-engaged research, you probably don't need to have a lot of proficiency in community-engaged research. But if you are, you better be pretty darn good at it. And so this is the NIH one. At Wisconsin, we've actually split 2 of these because we didn't like how they did it. And we literally, within the KL2, we actually on an annual basis have people assess where they are, and we have their mentors assess where they are, because then that drives the training plan, that drives the discussions of how to get better at what you're doing. The other thing that's really critical is have an individualized development plan. This is one of the things, if you do a postdoc that's funded by the NIH, you have to do one of these. If you don't, you really don't have to, but create one. There's a bunch of them online. If you email me, I'm happy to send you the one that we use. But basically it helps you define your target and how you're going to get there. You want to think about non-research factors. You're going to think about your milestones, and you want to be updating this every 6 to 12 months. Within our department, the researchers, we all present them at our twice-a-month research meetings, and we get feedback from all the other faculty and fellows and residents and trainees and other sorts that come to the meeting. And it tends to be really, really valuable because it helps you refine where you're going. What could those milestones be? On research training, it may be very well, what classes are you going to take? When are you going to take them? On the studies, how are you going to lay it out? A lot of times what we say is year 1, you're going to do some sort of data set analyses. We have a lot of them. It's a lot easier to do. Here you go. Analyze it. Write a paper. It helps you start building that portfolio so you can get that career development award. Moving then to maybe a retrospective study, then maybe moving something that's more prospective, accessing existing studies that are ongoing and having a spin-off. All sorts of things are a potential. You stick it on that IDP so you know when and how you want to do it. Obviously, in the papers, you want to show that you're going to have increasing quantity and impact, and you're going to, over years, move to the senior author. You're going to need a bunch in the first, the middles are fine, and then as you get along, you want to see yourself being senior and mentoring other people eventually. The grants, this depends on your individual position. A lot of times what we push is your first year or 2, you're looking at that pre-K award, the pre-career development award. It might be a couple of years, it may be an internal institutional thing, it may be the SAEM research training grant, the EMF equivalent. Within the geriatrics realm, it's the GEMSTAR that NIH gives. There's a lot of them out there. Then you're also at that time looking at pilots. Then you're looking at the K award, which is really absolutely critical, I think, if you're going to be that independent investigator. And then that R-level awards. We've always called them RO1s. They've got lots of different numbers after them now. It's turned into alphabet soup, but basically it's that very large independent grant. You also don't want to forget about your team development. I think we've said continuously here, this is a team sport, and that means you're going to have collaborators, trainees, staff across the board. And how is your team going to grow and develop? When you're that brand new faculty member, it's probably you and yourself doing most of the work. But soon you may get an undergrad or a med student or a PhD student or a resident or a fellow or another collaborator from another department. And then your team will just keep growing after that until there's a lot of things going on. And then you are truly supervising. Probably one of the things I'm sassed about my career now is I don't actually pull up data and do a lot of stats analysis myself. I love doing that. I now have one of a couple other people do that because I need to go work on the next grant. So how do you evaluate this? You want to really be holding to those milestones, and the mentor should particularly be thinking about this. How are the grants going? How are the papers going? Are those classes getting done? And that should be reviewed. The qualitative check-in is also really important. A lot of times with my mentees, it's just like, hey, how are things going? What are your barriers? What's going on? What's changed this week? And then finally, I would actually strongly suggest evaluating that mentor-mentee relationship. And this is important on both sides. We actually do this in Excel, is list out the domains on one side and then have the mentee rate themselves and the mentors rate the mentees and say, hey, are each of these domains being covered? Because if you've got red all the way across where nobody's covering, I don't know, medical informatics, that's what you care about, you've got a problem and you need to figure out how to fill that hole. Finally, from the mentor standpoint, I think it's really critical to create that culture of accountability. Really have those deadlines there. Really make sure that the mentee is achieving them with quality. Not just getting that grant out even though it's really not ready to go out the door. But in order to do that, you also have the resources there to help achieve. Whether it's actually the time, it's whether the space, it's whether the dollars. The mentees are responsible to use it and be successful using it. But the mentors also need to remember, if failure is there, at some point you've got to cut it off and say, hey, this doesn't seem to be working. Why do we think it's not working, and where do we want to go from here? And that, I'm going to stop touching this keyboard and turn it over for general questions.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions first for Dr. Manish Shah? Not? Okay. Let's open for discussion or other questions you may have for any or all of us. Or comments, experience, cries for help?
So you guys have like a model for like the optimal administrative research kind of structure? Like, lots of places have like a research director that might be a PhD, and then they got faculty that's a research something, and they got an education person that's a research something. Like how would you envision that that's fitting into like these sort of mental patterns?
Thanks. So that's a great question, because how much research infrastructure there is where you're going is going to really be important. And those are the resources that, I talked about a mentor provides for you. So I think there are a number of different models that work. I think there are now a growing number of really strong departments of emergency medicine in the country that actually have all of that infrastructure, where there's paid staff that you'll be able to access. There's a biostatistician, either master's level or doctoral level within the department, administrative help with technical stuff like IRB applications and so on. These are all things, for example, that we have in my division. There also, though, are institutionally available resources, and so you need to understand some departments are very plugged into their CTSA, where, again, there's biostatistical help and methodologic help that you can access either as a fellow or a junior faculty member. So this all, though, is very focused on the research side. I'm not talking about, like, the residency research director who's helping the residents with their projects, which, by the way, is a job you do not want if you are serious about developing a research career of your own. But how much administrative structure there is in the department is really important. Is there something you're looking for that you think was missing where you were? Or?
No, you just said that I have the job that I don't want.
Got it. Let's talk later.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, so I think infrastructure is essential, and I agree that there's multiple different ways of structuring things. My particular group, so I'm the head of what we just named the Center of Resuscitation Science, which is just a name for our research group, and we grew so large that it was kind of hard to fit in the model exactly in the ED because there's a whole bunch of other research going on. But within my group, we have, kind of as you're saying, we have a PhD statistician, a master's degree statistician, we have IRB support, we have 4 or 5 fellows, there's junior faculty, a number of senior faculty, 7 or 8 research assistants that have labs. So it's a big group. And one of the things that, and I think everyone had mentioned, is that it's a team sport. And one of the things that we foster also is the mentoring the mentee. There's like we have so many people in our group, I can't possibly, that most people want to have, well, it can't possibly be everywhere. So what we have done is kind of create a mentoring the mentees, the mentors, and then so we have our fellows mentor the residents, and then the junior faculty mentor the fellows and whatnot. And so it kind of goes up and down the chain, and everybody kind of works together. I think one important thing, too, with the research infrastructure is bringing folks together. We have a weekly series of meetings where we bring a whole team together, and so folks can present their work. We know what's going on. We can set the milestones that were mentioned. I don't know, but there's more than one ways to do it, but I think infrastructure is essential for particularly clinical trials research, but any kind of effective research.
I think the only caveat I'm going to put on that is I frequently hear of people that are very junior say, I need someone to help me write this grant. I need someone to write this part of the grant for me. You would never let somebody intubate who hasn't practiced, hasn't gotten some experience under good oversight. I think it's important for the junior folks to write IRBs, get very good at that, write grants, get very good at that, because they are never going to get that high level of proficiency if someone just does it for them. And so, small caveat on this.
That's a fair point.
The other thing that might be helpful is SAEM a few years back created a pathway for approval of research fellowships, and that's available online. And I think what's nice about that is it gives some recommendations of what a program should be, and it sets off what the expectations are around networking, projects, support, etc. And so I think that gives an idea of how things might be structured. Thank you. Other questions, comments? Any from our panel?
Well, I mean, I'm a little curious about this audience. So, when you were asked, they weren't residents in the room, there was one fellow, nobody said they were mentoring anybody. Why are you all here? What were you hoping to learn or discuss?
I have a question. I'm a junior faculty member. I'm Justin Yan from Western University in London, Canada. I have a question regarding protecting myself from everyone else's projects and not my own. I was wondering if the panel could comment on strategies where I want to get my name out there and I want to be collaborative and help my co-investigators in other areas, but I also want to protect my own time and aim towards those papers and grants that I'm working towards. So I don't know what you can comment on that.
Yeah, I think this is a very common problem that junior faculty have. I think our first questioner had something serious. So I'm going to tell you what I tell my junior faculty members, which I'm not sure everyone up here will agree with. And I left it out of the talk because it was more general, but when you as a junior faculty member are working with, certainly with residents or students, and to some extent even with fellows, and you're on a primary research track, they should be helping you do things that you need to have done. So you should not be mentoring them on the medical student's pet idea that will never go anywhere and never get published. That's not a good use of your time. Or even the resident who may have a decent idea. Because again, what the students and residents and fellows, really all the levels below you, they will learn by acquiring skills working on well-organized, well-conceived, well-conducted research. So if you find yourself, by being collegial, you're spread in a million different directions on lots of little projects, most of which are not going anywhere because you are trying, to be supportive and collegial. You're doing both you and your mentee a disservice. They won't learn anything useful because it won't get done. And you now are spread so thin. Now, there are residency faculty who are not on a primary research track, who I think, and there are, content experts, there's the ultrasound director and the sim director and, the med ed people who are very appropriate mentors for residents who want to do projects in that area. But the residents who find you because they want to learn something about research, have them do something that needs to be done for one of your projects so that you stay focused. This has to be true at least until you get your first bit of funding. Once you're, you have your grant, you could be a little bit more magnanimous, a little bit more generous, but at your level, junior faculty, you kind of have to stay on the straight and narrow, and your mentor should be helping you do that, not sending fellows for you to mentor. So,
I think the
I don't
practical,
know who your mentor is, but.
I think the practical side of it is and what I do is, or what I did when I was junior is say, hey, here's my level of expectations. You're going to work on one of these topic areas. I'm going to expect all this really quickly.
Yep.
And most of the people that are just going to cause more headaches for me than anything else would disappear and leave me alone. And you'd get some real stars coming through. But, you don't say no, you say sure, and here's what my expectation is.
Yeah, they self-select.
I think it's the right person, right project in yourself. It's where are you in your career stage, and who can you help, and what projects can you work with? We have the luxury of, honestly, of support. Right? So, through the government or through our department to do mentoring. So our perspective comes from that because that's part of our job. But I think that's because we have protected time. We have time that's devoted for that. But I think if you don't have time, you may have to be a bit more Machiavellian in terms of what you can support and see if you decide for yourself, can I really do the mentoring that for this person, or do I need to protect myself?
I agree with what everyone said. And the other thing is that it's not being, if you're junior faculty and you're trying to become independent faculty, is that what I understand, independent researchers, you're unfortunately, for good or for bad, there's a time pressure here. I mean, to figure out how to get things down and to get your grants and get things off the ground. So in a sense, I don't know that you're being, in the long range, it's not selfish, because what you're going to do is establish yourself, so then on the future, then you can then be that person who then brings other people along. But right now, it's time critical, if you're a junior faculty or fellow who's working for that first couple grants to get off the ground, that kind of has to be mission critical. But it's still it's not being selfish, because you'll be able to give back, but you just got to kind of get your foot on the ground first.
So we're out of time, but we'd love to talk to you if you have questions individually. Be happy. But thank you again for joining us. And thank you for all our folks on the panel, too.